During the first half of the 1990s, two video game companies battled for dominance of the North American home video game market. They employed the use of mascots, edgy marketing campaigns, and rapidly evolving technology to push their products to the edge of their capabilities. Events that transpired during this time period went on to affect the landscape of the home video game market for many years to come. This is the story of Nintendo versus Sega, the 16-bit console war. Nintendo was founded in September of 1889 in Kyoto, Japan. They produced different types of playing cards, but with sales in decline and a number of unsuccessful business ventures, their current president, Hiroshi Yamauchi, needed to find a new business model to stay profitable. Nintendo started producing toys in the late 1960s and expanded into electronic toys during the 1970s. They entered the home video game market in 1977 with the release of their Color TV game system. This was followed in 1980 with the release of their popular Game & Watch handheld games, and in 1981 they released the international arcade hit, Donkey Kong. Nintendo started development of a new home video game console and released the Family Computer, or Famicom, in July of 1983. The console was redesigned for the North American market as the Nintendo Entertainment System for a test launch in the fall of 1985 and a regional release in 1986. To avoid a repeat of the video game crash of 1983, Nintendo employed numerous regulations to control the market. Notable was the use of a lockout chip to control what games were released and limiting third-party developers to releasing 5 games per year. Developers found ways around both of these regulations, like Tengen's reverse engineering of the lockout chip and subsequent release of unlicensed games starting in 1988. Konami subsidiary Ultra Games was founded to circumvent the 5 games per year release limit. With this new label, Konami released a total of 7 games in 1988. Nintendo found huge success in North America, and in 1990 they controlled around 90% of the market. Sega's origins date back to 1940 with the partnership of American businessmen Irving Bromberg, his son Martin Bromberg, who later changed his last name to Bromley, and family friend James Humpert. In 1946, the 3 men founded Service Games in Honolulu, Hawaii, to provide coin-operated games, including slot machines, to U.S. military bases. With the passing of the Johnson Act in 1951 outlawing the transportation of gambling devices through Hawaii, Service Games of Japan was founded in Tokyo the following year. In 1957, David Rosen of Rosen Enterprises began importing coin-operated games into Japan. In 1965, his company merged with Bromley's to form Sega Enterprises Limited, with Rosen as CEO. Sega started developing their own coin-operated games in the late 1960s and found international success with the release of Periscope. In the 1970s, they started producing arcade video games, but with revenue dropping in the early 1980s, they decided to enter the home console market. In July of 1983, Sega released the SG-1000 on the same day Nintendo released the Famicom. The console was redesigned twice, with its third revision being called the Sega Mark III. Sega entered the North American home console market in 1986 with the release of the Sega Master System, a remodeled version of its Sega Mark III. It was hampered by its small library of games and sold poorly. If Sega wanted to compete with Nintendo in the expanding and very profitable North American market, they needed a new home console to do so. In August of 1989, the Sega Genesis was released in North America with Altered Beast as its pack-in game. Newly hired Sega of America CEO Michael Katz devised a plan of developing games with the names and likenesses of celebrities and athletes, and using aggressive advertising that called out Nintendo for not being able to bring home the same experience that Sega could. The popularity of the Super Mario Bros. Games made Sega realize they needed a new game and mascot that would rival Mario. An in-house competition was held for creating a new mascot, and Sonic the Hedgehog was born. Development was handled by a 7-person group at Sega of Japan known as Sonic Team. Gameplay would differ from Super Mario Bros. In that it would focus on speed with a protagonist that rolled into a ball to defeat enemies. Sega of America had issues with some of the character designs, and compromises were made to make the character of Sonic more appealing to the North American market. With sales of the Genesis not meeting the expectations of Sega of Japan's CEO Hayao Nakayama, Tom Kalinske was hired in mid-1990 to replace Michael Katz. Kalinski's plan to take over North America was to make Sonic the Hedgehog the pack-in game for the Genesis, cut the price of the Genesis, expand the aggressive advertising campaigns, and create an American team to develop games for an American audience. This plan shocked Sega of Japan's board of directors, but Nakayama gave his approval. Sonic the Hedgehog was released in June of 1991, and in November of that year it was the pack-in game for the Genesis in North America. People who bought a Genesis with Altered Beast could request a free copy of Sonic the Hedgehog by mail. It's the best-selling game on the Genesis with over 14 million units sold. Nintendo remains passive, almost ignoring Sega in North America until 1991. With the impending release of the Super Nintendo Entertainment System and Super Mario World as its pack-in game, Nintendo went on the offensive. Their marketing wasn't as aggressive as Sega's, and it focused on the advanced graphics of the Super Nintendo over its competitors. Super Mario World went on to become the best-selling game on the console with over 20 million units sold. Nintendo scored a huge win in 1992 with their home port of Street Fighter II. It would release on the Super Nintendo just over 1 year earlier than Sega would get their home port. The Super Nintendo port of Street Fighter II: The World Warrior sold over 6 million units and is the 5th best-selling game on the console. It was Capcom's single best-selling game for 2 decades until it was surpassed by Resident Evil 5. Nintendo and Sega continually improved their products to give them an edge over each other. Sega released their first system add-on for the Genesis, the Sega CD, in October of 1992. The compact disc format provided CD-quality sound, and the additional hardware provided sprite scaling and rotation. It also gave us interactive FMV games, which depending on your opinion are either memorable or forgettable. It could be argued that they were more like interactive movies than games, with the limited gameplay mechanics they provided. In March of 1993, Nintendo released Star Fox, the first game to use the Super FX chip. This additional coprocessor made the Super Nintendo capable of producing impressive 3D polygonal graphics. Due to the cost of the additional chip, games that utilized it were more expensive. Upon its release in 1993, 3D graphics of this detail hadn't been seen on home consoles. In October of 1992, Mortal Kombat was released in arcades and it became very popular with its over-the-top violence. By early 1993, Sega controlled around 55% of the North American market, and both companies knew they needed ports of Mortal Kombat on their home consoles. On the day known as Mortal Monday, home ports of Mortal Kombat were released. Nintendo's version had all blood removed and the game's signature fatalities toned down. The Genesis version retained all of the gore if players entered a code. This led to Sega outselling Nintendo 3-1, and as a result of this, Nintendo started to relax its anti-violence policies. With the rise of graphic content and more realistic graphics in video games of the early 1990s, parents started to voice their concern. This led to congressional hearings about video game violence and its effect on children in December of 1993 and March of 1994. Mortal Kombat and Night Trap garnered a lot of attention, but so did Lethal Enforcers with its Justifier light gun. To avoid government regulation, the ESRB was founded in September of 1994 to review and rate games, so parents were informed if a game was appropriate for their child. In November of 1993, Disney's Aladdin was released for the Genesis. It's the first game to use traditional hand-drawn animation, which was then digitized and compressed with a proprietary process called Digicel. Disney's Aladdin sold 4 million units and is the 3rd best-selling game on the Genesis. Nintendo needed a game to compete against this visual showcase. Rare, a developer of numerous games for the Nintendo Entertainment System, showed Nintendo its Silicon graphics workstations and their ability to render 3D models. Nintendo wanted to revive its dormant Donkey Kong series, and Rare got the job. Donkey Kong Country was released in November of 1994 to rave reviews. It sold 9.3 million units and is the third best-selling game on the console. It spawned 2 sequels and is credited for keeping the Super Nintendo relevant as competitors released the next generation of more powerful consoles. On the same day that Donkey Kong Country hit store shelves, Sega released the 32X as a stopgap to bridge the 16-bit to 32-bit console generations. It failed to attract developers with the next generation of consoles already having been announced, and Sega quickly stopped supporting the system. It is considered to be a commercial failure and will be one of the critical missteps that led Sega to stop producing hardware. At the 1991 Summer Consumer Electronics Show, Sony announced their partnership with Nintendo to produce a CD-based add-on for the Super Famicom. Hiroshi Yamauchi felt the agreement was more favorable to Sony, so a deal was struck with Philips without Sony's knowledge. The day after Sony's presentation, Nintendo announced they were partnering with Philips for their CD add-on. This embarrassed and angered Sony, and it gave them ambition to produce their own home console. The Sony PlayStation was released in North America in September of 1995 and rapidly gained market dominance by the end of the decade. With Sony's PlayStation doing very well, Bill Gates of Microsoft became concerned that Sony would start taking further market share away from the PC. Work on what would become the Xbox started in 1998, and the system was released in North America in November of 2001. As aggressive as Sega was in North America, Nintendo won the war. The Super Nintendo sold 49 million units, while the Sega Genesis sold 31 million units. Even though Nintendo was victorious, time has shown us that they possibly made the biggest misstep. The events that took place during the 1991 Summer Consumer Electronics Show set off a chain reaction that drastically changed the video game market by the start of the 21st century. If you would have told me in 1995 that Sony would quickly become such a dominating force by the end of the 20th century, and that Microsoft, the developer of Windows, would enter the market at the start of the 21st century, I would not have believed you.